Go.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic Service Learning and Civic and Community Engagement Conference. And this is the faculty focus session. My name is Sue Sarah. As we said, I am an Associate Director for the Community Engagement Initiative at the University of Delaware. We are a university-wide program under the Provost Office, and my focus is mainly on working with undergraduates and with faculty who work with undergraduates to add community engagement components to their academic plan and their co-curricular activities. I'm really excited to be here, and the first thing I wanted to do was share a few reminders about the session. If you can, please rename yourselves, including your institution, your organization name, and your pronouns. As Anthony mentioned, the session is being recorded and will be shared on Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic's website. We'll begin this afternoon's session with 5 to 10 minute presentations from each of the faculty panelists, which we anticipate will take about 30 minutes or so. Please be patient as we transition between panelists, as each of them will be sharing their own screens for their presentations. After each panelist has spoken, depending on the amount of people here, we will engage in a 15-minute reflection on the panelists' remarks and presentation. This could include breakout rooms if we have a large enough group. Otherwise, we'll go straight to a conversation amongst those of us who are here. And that time will open the session to questions and comments. So I'll ask you to please put questions in the Q&A if you'd like, because we'll be drawing on them at the end, or just keep notes for yourself and use the raise the hand feature during the reflection and Q&A parts as we go on later on. I will ask you to mute your microphones and keep them muted until the reflection and Q&A portion of this afternoon's session. So I'm going to introduce everybody, and then they're going to go ahead and give their presentations, and then we'll have a chance to open up the discussion to all of the people who are here. So the first speaker will be Dr. Sosanya Jones. Dr. Jones is an associate professor of educational leadership and policy studies in the School of Education at Howard University. She has nearly 20 years experience as an administrator, researcher, and educator in higher education. Dr. Jones teaches courses in higher education policy, governance, diversity and equity, and advanced qualitative methods. Her research interests focus on the nexus between policy and practice for diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. Our next speaker will be Dr. Nusta Carranza-Coe. Dr. Coe is an assistant professor in the School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Baltimore. Her research interests include cross-regional research on human rights and transitional justice processes in Latin America and East Asia, including policies of memorialization in Peru and South Korea, and questions of indigenous peoples' rights, namely forced sterilization and indigenous identities in Peru. Dr. Coe has conducted fieldwork in Peru, South Korea, and Brazil, and held visiting research positions. The next will be my colleague, Dr. Lynette Young-Overby. Dr. Overby is the University of Delaware Director of the Community Engagement Initiative and founding director of the Partnership for Arts and Culture. She also directs the UD Dance Minor and is the artistic director of the Sharing Our Legacy Dance Theater. Dr. Overby received the 2018 Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Dance Education Organization, and in 2020 served on the Biden-Harris Agency Review Team in Arts and Humanities. Recently, she was inducted into the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship, and in 2021, she was appointed to serve on the National Council on the Humanities. Additionally, Dr. Overby serves as the University of Delaware Stage Representative to Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic and is a member of CCMA's Equity Task Force. And our final speaker will be Dr. Tiffany Parkman. Dr. Parkman is the director of the undergraduate program in Human Services Administration and a lecturer in the School of Health and Human Services. Oops, hold on a second. At the University of Baltimore. She has had a love for the mentally ill for well over a decade and has worked in almost every area of the helping field. From her experiences, she learned the critical role that family and having good family relationships play in all that we do. And this led to her research interests focusing on families, prisoner reentry, and the mentally ill. I will now hand the microphone over to Dr. Jones to begin the panel.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. As Susan said, I am Dr. Sasanya Jones. Pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm associate professor at Howard University, located in Washington, D.C., which sits on the ancestral lands of the Nachata and the Anacostans, and neighbors the ancestral lands of the Pescataway and Pamunkey peoples, who were forcibly removed and displaced. We also recognize that DC marks a place where enslaved persons were written into law and were made to build the very structures that we celebrate today. And so we honor their memory, their labor, and their humanity. And I'm really excited about being here today and about this topic, namely because the pathways to becoming a faculty member, at least when I was coming through, were so veiled in mystery and frankly anxiety. There's so many misconceptions and untruths, but also truths that need to be changed. And community engagement is definitely one of those. Many times faculty and those aspiring to be faculty are taught and even trained that conducting traditional research and publishing is the golden ticket and the only way to be a faculty member. But we know otherwise. In a recent article, for example, by the APLU, 90% faculty surveyed felt that implementing service learning made them a better faculty member and colleague and civically engaged citizen. And it made them better teachers as well. 50% of faculty indicated that their motivation for incorporating service learning was related to personal commitment to social change. And I think the most surprising statistic, at least for me, was that 75% of department heads thought community engaged scholarship was critical toward promotion and tenure. Now, the reason why I think that's surprising is because our promotion and tenure processes haven't really changed that much. As you all probably know, higher ed is very slow to change. So this talk, especially coming from me, my segment, I am talking to the tenured folks, the people who have protected roles, who have a little bit of power to make some changes. And I hope you guys take it in and go back to your campuses and start to implement some of these changes. There are several things that can be done and should be done to prioritize service and community engagement, to cultivate a campus of community engagement. And tenured faculty, faculty senate, and administration plays a vital role in changing the culture around these things. There has to be some kind of accountability for these values that we keep espousing. We can't say that we want to create global civically engaged citizens and give back to the community if we are not acknowledging or rewarding those who model that behavior. So tenured faculty who have protection and power can start asking critical questions about how community engagement counts in the tenure and promotion process, and how it counts in our strategic planning, in our programs, in our departments, in our schools of education, and university-wide. Where does this show up? We can't just talk about these things in our PR and our marketing. Where does it show up in our work? How can we start holding ourselves accountable for the values we espouse, the values we teach? For example, the Faculty Senate has the power to move the needle in reviewing guidelines for tenure and promotion so that service isn't just a check mark, that it becomes just as important as publishing. Inviting administration into the conversation about how we can start to make these changes is critical, and where we can prioritize it more. If people are at a loss of how to do these things, there are many studies and institutions that have led the way. They have examples on how institutions can do this, how departments can do this. Carrie Ann O'Mara actually did a study exploring academic reward systems within College of Educations for faculty seeking promotion and tenure. She offers some suggestions on how we can reframe community engagement in a way that it's seen as scholarly. These include connecting community engagement to our teaching and learning, to our scholarship, and our professional development. To have peer review by institutions, departments, and scholars who are community engaged to see if we are actually walking the walk that we're talking. Gathering evidence of impact, not just, are you, increasing your numbers, but how are people feeling about the work you're doing? How is it inspiring people? How is it leading to changes? Even if they're minor changes, how are you moving the needle? And then most of all, I think we need to do more work in disseminating and talking about the work that we're doing. There are a lot of people doing some really great work, but they're so busy doing the work, they haven't figured out how to talk about it. And we need to share, engage in knowledge sharing about how we can disseminate and talk about the work that we're doing. If you're untenured and you're at an institution that doesn't prioritize service or doesn't care about your community engagement or even discourages it, because we know those institutions exist, it's important that you start strategizing how to connect what you do and how often you do it to your scholarship and your teaching. These things do not have to be separate. And in fact, they should and can feed each other. And so, for example, the National Center for Institutional Diversity has a seminar, and I have resources, a resource list. I can drop it in the chat for those who want more information on all of these things. But they have actual video seminar how you can connect your community engagement to your scholarship, to your teaching, and how you frame that in your dossier. And then there are podcasts popping up on how scholars can reframe, rethink, reimagine how they do scholarship so that it's more community engaged, but also reframing how they talk about their community engagement. So I hope we can talk more about that, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I know I have a bunch of questions, so I hope the audience is keeping track of their questions as well. We look forward to following up on this. Our next speaker is Dr. Ko, and so I'll ask her to unmute and start her presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I think I have a big shoot. I mean, this is a big presentation to follow because I was nodding throughout the entire first presentation by Dr. Jones. So thank you so much for having me in this panel. I also want to acknowledge the lands where I'm speaking from, the ancestral lands of the Iroquois speaking Susquehanna people and Algonquin speaking peoples, so the Cedarville Band of the Piscataway Conoy, the Piscataway Indian Nation, and the Piscataway Conoy tribe, all of whom have shared this idea through their relations and whose descendants are thriving and resisting settler occupation. And obviously, I also want to acknowledge the violent legacy and land thefts initiated by white colonialist settlers who first invaded the Chesapeake region in the 17th century. So I'm basically speaking from Baltimore. It's a very long way of saying I'm speaking from Baltimore. I have a few slides that I would like to share. Primarily, I don't think I'm going to spend too much time on each one of them because I think a great deal has already been covered by my colleague here in this panel, which I think it's really amazing. Again, thank you for having me. But I think I just want to mention maybe just a few things that I think are important for us to think about. When I was first invited in this panel, I kept thinking about this notion of creating an equitable, diverse, and inclusive, also known as the JEDI culture and things like that. And it so happens that it actually coincided with a workshop that I'm a part of regarding pedagogy, notions of culturally relevant pedagogy, that has to do with describing a form of teaching that culturally engaging, we're looking at experiences and cultures that are traditionally excluded from mainstream settings, which is, I believe, what Dr. Jones was also referring to in her presentation. And I think I want to go back to that idea. In particular, we call this the notion of acknowledging one's positionality. And I think this is something that I also talk about in another slide, which I'll show you in a little bit, regarding the institution's positionality as well as the faculty's positionality. I think Dr. Jones made a really strong point regarding the fact that this has to be an institutional effort. It cannot be a single faculty effort alone. It needs to be systematic. It needs to be coherent. It also has to be well collaborated together. And it is to acknowledge one's positionality. So in a very basic sense, even us just renaming our names here in this panel and stating that we are whatever pronouns we would like to be referred to as, I think that in itself is already a sense of positionality. The other positionality is when you walk into the classroom, when you have that engagement with students, acknowledge the fact of where you are coming from. So in my case, I always specify that I'm a participant observer of the American society, that I did not grow up here, and I specify my ethnic background and the biases and stereotypes that because of my ethnic background as an indigenous Peruvian and Korean person that I may be bringing into the classroom. And by acknowledging my positionality, I'm also opening myself in a somewhat of a vulnerable state, if you will, to be able to accept others' positions in terms of where students are coming from and what that actually means. One of the ways in which I think a culturally inclusive culture can be made is mentorship. And I think, it might be that University of Baltimore, we have many different programs and we also have a lot of professional focus, and we also have lots of graduate students, but we also have first generation college students that are also on campus as well. So I think this mentorship that is formed with students to guide them through the process, because it can be a daunting process through which you actually have to navigate everything, can be an important process through which the student actually feels like that they belong. And I think that's a very tiny little step that you position yourself in offering as a faculty member for the students. Just as a side note, the student that actually invited me to be a part of this panel, Daniel, one of the things that he actually said, he's at the University of Baltimore, was that when he walked into the classroom, he knew he belonged at the University of Baltimore because of me. He said, because I was the other, as well as he was the other, because I wasn't, one of the majority race, and he did not feel that he was. And so having someone, he's always specified, the foreign professor in the room really helped him identify and feel that he belonged. An immigrant professor, he kept mentioning. So I think there are many tiny little ways through which, as a faculty, we can feel this way. I'm going to skip over this slide and just go to the next one, because I think image sometimes is much more powerful. One of the things that I emphasized in my previous slide has to do with this notion of decolonializing your syllabus, decolonializing your classroom, which basically can be as simple as purposefully including, readings from faculty of color, scholars from the Global South, include different voices, provide students with different perspectives. That's the first way, I believe, that we can start creating a notion of inclusion. The other institutional level way that we can perhaps do this is identify areas where the university can help in creating inclusive environments, such as our Inclusion Alley at UB. This is something that was entirely a student-led initiative. This was something that Daniel spearheaded, and Daniel was also resourceful. We talked about this many times regarding Columbus Day celebrations and the need to decolonialize the calendar, and the efforts that he led into trying to make that into Indigenous Peoples Day at the University of Baltimore, which makes faculty such as myself of Latinx and also Indigenous descent feel somewhat also welcome. So it can be a collaborative effort between the student and the faculty member together in creating an inclusive environment, even for faculty and also for the students as well. One thing that I think our university needs to do a little bit of a better work, and I'm hoping that this becomes the start of something, is basically for the university to create talks for the university, for the public to attend. And I think this is something that Dr. Jones was saying, regarding the collaboration between the community and the institution that needs to take place at a more, I would say, consistent level, so that it's not like a one-time thing. Here you go, window dressing. It's not something like that, but rather something much more consistent that can be developed and that can be, that can create a better culture, which I think the Inclusion Alley initiative that includes the LGBTQI communities colors at Mount Vernon, which is a very hot spot for LGBTQI communities and pride related events here in Baltimore City, is a big deal, in addition to the beautiful mural Black Lives Matter, which was a very proud moment for many of our students on campus who also identify with one particular ethnic background. In addition, I don't know if you can see in the background, there's a Juneteenth date that's specified as well. So this has kind of become also like a touristic area of Mount Vernon. And this is thanks to our students, but this is also because you have that mentorship and synergy that's built between the faculty and the students. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ko. And our next speaker is Dr. Overby.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Can everyone see that?
No.
No?
Or at least not yet. It might be taking a few seconds.
No? Well, it's showing up on my screen, so I don't know. Okay. Let me end that. And you see it now or no?
No.
Okay. All right. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, I'm going to try one more, and then if not, then Anthony, if you could help me out. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Hmm.
We can see it now,
Oh,
Dr.
okay. Always an issue with me. All right. I will start from the beginning. And thank you again for inviting me to share. What I'm going to talk about are some programs that we've done at the University of Maryland that find this intersection between community engagement and social justice. And I'm on a subcommittee of our promotion and tenure group of the Faculty Senate. And this is a definition that we came up with for engaged scholarship, where we look at the fact that the work should be mutually beneficial, that when we work with community partners in addressing public issues, that it can be in teaching and research, creative activity, or service. And it's an opportunity to apply our disciplinary knowledge in collaboration with community partners to benefit local, regional, and national and international communities, and their own scholarship, which is really important. So the two areas I'm going to talk about, and the first one is a speaker series that we've been doing for the last 2 years. It actually started when I was vice president of the Faculty Senate, as well as deputy director of our community engagement initiative. It was the summer of 2020. And this was right after the George Floyd incident, and we were in the pandemic. And so the Faculty Senate had a big meeting, and we talked about, so what can we do? How can we begin to address some of these issues through the work we're doing? And that's when the Community Engagement Initiative began to plan these speaker series, monthly speaker series, where we brought in faculty to talk about the kind of work that they did in community engagement and also connected with social issues. The second project I'm going to talk about quickly is our partnership for arts and culture, because we have faculty and community grant programs since 2018, where through the lens of arts and culture, faculty create projects that have a social justice and community engagement focus. So these are just a list, and on our website, you can actually go in, see the webinars that were created on these different topics from that time. And we're in the midst of this year's finishing up our speaker series for this year. Again, you see some of the titles. They deal with health, education, arts and culture, bringing in community partners and our faculty. This is one of the kind of covers that we have, which was on the topic of facilitating social justice through arts and culture. It gives us an opportunity, especially with the webinar format, where we can invite lots of community partners who may not have come to our campus otherwise in this series. And we have had 2 on health. Again, many community partners who talk about the work that they've been doing. This is one, because I know we want to have this focus on faculty as well. Jeremy Firestone and Monica Sanders, faculty members who have done work in this area and told us about what it means in environmental injustices that are occurring. So a little bit about our Partnership for Arts and Culture. This grants program, a small grants, so we get $4,000 to $5,000 in these grants, but it's an opportunity for us to meet with the people who receive these grants and talk about how do you make your project scholarly and mutually beneficial. And so right from the beginning, they have to have a project that's not just going into community, collecting data, or going into community performing, but it really is a mutually beneficial project right from the beginning. And so I talked to the faculty about, these are some steps you want to think about with your project: identifying shared interests, establishing a plan, having ongoing discussions, including formative and summative assessments, disseminating project outcomes with the partners. And I usually we have a meeting of all the funded individuals, and I talk about, so how would you disseminate this? I know for your profession, but also for the community, and have them really think about those items right before they begin the projects. So these are some of the projects. This is Roger Horowitz, who conducted oral histories with our Jewish Community Center. John Cox, who worked with the Lenni Lenape Indian tribe. He's an art and design faculty member. And Ann Bowler, Department of Women and Gender Studies, working with our Creative Vision Factory. Creative Vision Factory is located in Wilmington, and we have men and women who have behavioral or mental issues, and they produce art there. And in this project, she collaborated with her class as well, and they digitized the artwork of the individuals at that location. So these projects do provide a space to share mutually beneficial projects, and it provides faculty with scholarly community engagement criteria. I always talk about the co-creation, co-implementation, co-assessment, and co-dissemination of these projects. Because if we want our work to be looked upon as equally as impactful as a journal article, we need to demonstrate how we're able to do that and be clear about and be able to articulate ways that our work has made an impact. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Lynette. And our next speaker will be Dr. Parkman, and then we will open this up to some questions.
Hello, everyone. Hang on one second. All right, hang on another second.
Dr. Parkman, while you're getting ready, I was just going to ask Anthony a question. Just wave at me when you're ready and I can stop. But Anthony, do you think that we'll go to breakout rooms after Dr. Parkman speaks?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, can we see that now? Trust me, I've done this before. Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you today. I want to thank the conference organizers for an insightful conference focused on moving society forward. I'm grateful for being considered for this opportunity, and it is truly an honor to be here. I am Tiffany Parkman, and I go by the pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm the director of the undergraduate program in Human Services Administration in the College of Public Affairs at the University of Baltimore. My colleague, Dr. Coe, and I work on the same sacred lands in Baltimore. I accidentally muted myself. When I was asked to contribute in this discussion of highlighting justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in our institution and communities, I wasn't quite sure where to start. But I have had the wonderful opportunity to see firsthand how various organizations from HBCUs to predominantly white institutions or PWIs promote or not in these areas. First, I want to situate my selection as a speaker with what I do. And part of what you heard about me came from the introduction. The items under my umbrella as director of the undergraduate program at the university include supporting faculty, students, building innovative programming, recruitment, among other things. At the University of Baltimore, we are designated as a second chance school, which means that I operate an undergraduate program in Human Services Administration at the Jessup Correctional Institute. And it's supported by the federal Pell Grant program, which were a part of the Obama administration legacy in the refunding of federal Pell Grants for persons who are incarcerated and under his My Brother's Keeper initiative. So I have students who are currently incarcerated. Another key role that keeps me busy is engaging with the community to provide solutions to problems as they see it. Very important work. And if you don't know, the University of Baltimore is knowledge that works. That is our tagline. And if I can toot my own horn, I think I'm doing a good job. My students love me. Most of the time. It's end of the semester, so we're going to see in a few weeks. But you know, in reflection, my time as a professor at the University of Baltimore did not always, you know, it wasn't always nice or the best. My life as an urban institution took some time, right? And if we are all being honest, we must address our own opportunities for growth. We are talking about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion at our institutions and how we can move the needle. I think in all of these topics, we must address the person we see in the mirror every day. And that's the person who will decide how we interact with the world. So as a faculty member whose job it is to cultivate and fertilize the minds of learners with whom I engage in my role, it's important to self-reflect and have an important daily exercise. What's important for any movement forward is for us, for each of us to self-reflect, to have an ability to look at our own journey and how that journey impacts your vision. And I don't think faculty members actually do this enough. I'm speaking as a faculty member and program director. However, this applies to all of us who are responsible for engaging with others. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. My parents are from Mississippi. I grew up in Southern Indiana. My parents and relatives are from Mississippi. My father, when we moved to Indiana, was the only Black person at his job. My mother went to work after my siblings and I grew up, and she was the only Black person at her job. Me and my sisters, we were a part of the 10% of the Black people that lived in Evansville, and I was a member of the 10% of the high school that was considered the inner city high school. So this little picture right here is the band picture and is illustrative of that. And so if we can have a little activity called Find Dr. Parkman, I'm there in the back by the curtains. So growing up, I was keenly aware of my differences, most obvious racial, and I grew to embed in my psyche how to move in a way as to not make others who didn't look like me uncomfortable. I also learned early on what it meant to be left out and what I had to do if I wanted to be included. My parents didn't go to college, but made it a requirement for me and my sisters. I was able to attend Tougaloo College and HBCU in Mississippi, whoop, whoop, Tougaloo, the University of Kentucky for my master's in marriage and family therapy, which taught me the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness, and required of all of us to engage in therapy to unearth these areas, these opportunity areas or areas of growth that would certainly emerge as we started our work with families in therapy. And finally, a doctorate from Virginia Tech in human development, where I trained as a family scholar. At Virginia Tech, I was able to have my tuition supported by teaching undergraduate course, as many of us have. As a graduate student teacher at a PWI, many of the students had not had a professor of color and during their undergraduate experience. It made for interesting classroom discussions and conversations, learning and growing on both sides. Coming from a working class family, it was interesting to see the perspective from the students and how those experiences that they had shaped their expectations of me as their instructor and how they saw their education. It also forced me to examine my expectations of my students, challenge my belief system and how I navigated them. Our experiences gave us various opportunities to examine and understand life. If we want to be effective in the promotion of JEDI issues, it first starts with us before we even come into the classroom. The work then becomes the focus on the students and how they see the world, their knowledge of communities, their solutions, their meaning-making systems, without the imposition of my PhD knows what's best all the time. When I arrived at the University of Baltimore, while not an HBCU, the school is designated as a minority serving institution due to the percentage of students of color. My first semester, I felt a sense of relief that most of my students were people of color and looked like me, and that they might get me a little bit more than my students at Virginia Tech. But what I learned was that many of them didn't really get me at all. Growing up in a big town is a lot different than growing up in an urban center. A non-traditional campus also looks a lot different than a traditional campus. The needs of the students are different and were very different from my personal experience at school and life. It took a little while to get adjusted and to find my space to see students and for them to see me. My first semester struggles were easily transitioned when I was able to do the work of understanding my students, the community, and the lives they live. By hearing their voices and allowing them at the table, reciprocal learning happened. Everyone wins, and we all feel like we are contributing. When this happens, you're left in a better position to help students. Faculty members must first do the work themselves. And unfortunately, I hear too often from students at my institution the issues they face with faculty members who don't understand them, who don't allow their voices to be heard, and most often than not, don't look like them. So my advice from a faculty perspective on these types of issues is to start with yourself and do a little bit more self-reflection. In the classroom, once your work is done, you can focus and think about how to approach classroom management, activities, and learning, what you want and what you want it to look like. As I have sought to bring student voices to the table, thinking about how to be more inclusive, I make sure I purposely incorporate activities that blend the classroom with real life happenings. And we've heard a little bit about service learning from our previous speaker. So learning about theories and their applications are cool for tests and exams, but what does it do for real life? And so going into the community and actually applying it with a community project is really where it's at. And everyone has a voice and everyone's at the table. Creating community partnerships with community organizations. My University of Baltimore students have different needs than the Virginia Tech students that I taught. The various intersections of life, career, personal goals of the group dictate the types of experiences that can be used effectively in the classroom. And in all of my classrooms, I incorporate this type of experiential learning. So if you see here are some examples of what we're doing just to highlight. So if you are from the DMV area, you may have had Taharka Brothers Ice Cream. It's a social entrepreneurship where they use people in the community who are actually stakeholders they are owners of this ice cream. And so it's amazing. It's amazing. When you come to Baltimore, we'll get some. It's amazing. And so I had them come to class to talk about the work that they were doing in the community with young people and how the people who are working for them own the company and how they're giving back. And so they came, they brought ice cream. Also, I have 2 community projects that my senior students worked on. The first is Paul's Place, where students fundraised dental supplies and monies to assist persons experiencing homelessness so that they could have dental care. The second, the picture down below where the students were on the desk, is at the Zeta Senior Center. So students were focused on helping seniors in the community, figuring out what their needs are, and they had a resource fair for them. Out of the classroom, it's also important to think about supporting, or to not think about, but to support students through activities. So another one of my roles at the university is I am the advisor for the Human Services Club. And so every year we go to the Henrietta Lacks Memorial Research Symposium that Johns Hopkins provides. We go to the National Organization for Human Services Conference, and then I support the students on a biennial basis as they do a domestic violence awareness forum. And so how universities can support this work? What are some missed opportunities? So I won't retell Dr. Jones's talk, who did a fantastic job highlighting how universities can support this work, particularly when we talk about supporting faculty members who are going through the tenure process. Universities can also support through initiatives and with money. And what I've learned as the director for a program and as an advisor of a student group is there's always money somewhere. There's always money somewhere. And so that money can be used to support these types of service learning activities, experiential learning activities, and strides can be made, not only in helping the students with these community activities, but it serves as a networking basis too, where the community sees what the university is doing for them. Well, much too often, universities thrive on researching and sucking from the communities, right? They want to use you as a research study and they want you to fill out their surveys. And the university hardly ever gives back. And so there's a chasm between the community and university and who really benefits from what's happening. And more often than not, it's not the community. But in this way, we have students who are working and who are solving community problems and who are contributing in ways that the community sees as a benefit. And then when they think about their education, where they might want to go, they think of the University of Baltimore. Or when they have grant money and they need help, they come to the University of Baltimore for this. So each year, my students are participating in at least 5 to 10 community activities. And some of these activities require funding to get off the ground, which can be a valuable resource, as I have said. Again, when I think about, my curriculum vitae, when I think about every year when I'm evaluated, it's always, oh, Tiffany's in the community, she's doing great work, but it's never alongside, it's not highlighted as much as publications or talks or conferences that I'm giving. And so these should be evaluated, as Dr. Jones said, as a strength for promotion and tenure, and as an evaluative tool in the classroom. And so this concludes my presentation. I thank you all for allowing me this time and the few minutes while I got myself together. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Parkman Shenanigans.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parkman. So these have been really interesting talks. I know I've got a bunch of questions to ask, but I think what we're going to do now is have all of the audience go into breakout rooms and maybe reflect a little bit on the questions that you have related to what the panelists talked about and your own personal and professional experiences as community engaged scholars and students. We're going to ask you to take some notes, raise some questions, and bring those back to us. And we'll take, it's not a huge group, so maybe we won't take 15 minutes, maybe 10 to 12 or so. And then we'll come back and all of your questions, we can present them to the panel. So Anthony's going to do that part. So otherwise, I'll just throw everybody out.
Excellent. Thank you, Sue.
So I do have a question about where the Q&A is, because I'm not seeing that on my screen.
Well, I think we can just open it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just had a very interesting discussion that was kind of something that I've been thinking about, which is how do we start to quantify or talk about the amount of time that's needed to be in communities that doesn't come off as being productive in the same way that other things count. And Dr. Kirshner mentioned, sort of starting to argue that PAR, participatory action research, is more important than, should be given more weight than typical research because of the amount of time it takes. So in the meantime, I'd like to open this up for questions about anything that the panelists talked about. And if you want to just, actually raise your hand, I'll keep an eye out and you can just join us. So, okay, Anthony.
Yeah, I have a question for the panelists. Yesterday at the keynote address, Dr. Stocks, who's with us today, good to see you, Dr. Stocks, mentioned that, we obviously in academia, we have PhD, people who go through a PhD program and have that as part of their title, which is what all of you represent. But Dr. Stocks talked about, and I want to say it correctly, the metaphorical PhD that our community members have, given their experience and knowledge of where they live. They know so much more than any single one of us would ever know. And so my question to you is, how, as faculty members and leaders on your campuses as well, how do we truly acknowledge that knowledge, the community-based knowledge that these folks have? How do we acknowledge it? And then how do we better integrate that into our universities?
Yeah, that's a really important issue. I think epistemic justice or injustice has been something that is becoming more talked about, but people really just don't know how to grapple with some of the tensions. One of the tensions is that you have people in this setting that's created to earn a degree, to legitimate their knowledge, and to promote their status. Um, and yet, you want them to turn around and say, you know, all knowledge is equal and valid. So then it becomes a question of then why are we, you know, why are we participating in this system that legitimates some forms of knowledge and doesn't others? I think we can acknowledge those contradictions and tensions, be transparent about them, but also we can create forums and opportunities for people with different types of knowledges, different types of perspectives that are lacking in the university to be heard and to be supported so that our students see that it has value, and how when those voices aren't there, how it hurts us in terms of building a better society. So inviting people in, highlighting the gaps in our knowledge that aren't there on campus and in the literature, and then inviting those voices in to stand in that gap and say we need to hear more from this community, from these people that have been excluded, to help us get to where we want to be.
Is there anybody else? I just think too that the way universities are set up now, it's a construct. Like they weren't always necessarily like that. If you go back to the beginning of like the progressive age, when they actually did value, you think of the work of John Dewey did, where they did value the knowledge of communities and in creating change and so on. So this is, you know, a fairly modern construct that seems immutable, but actually maybe isn't. And maybe we need to start to think about how we talk about that. Other questions? I had one for Dr. Parkman, if we can just switch gears a little bit. And I really found it interesting what you talked about reciprocal learning and how you had a need to sort of build that into your own life, that sort of reflection about where you come from and what you're bringing into the classroom or into your advising or whatever. And I wondered if you had any tips on how people build that into their, you know, day-to-day lives or week-to-week lives or semester-to-semester lives, because I think in ways that doesn't make it feel like, oh no, that's just one more thing I have to do. Like how do you make it more integral to you? Integral, that's not the word, but part of what you just do automatically.
I think part of it is asking a lot of questions. And I have a toddler who is about to turn 3, and I'm getting it back in my life tenfold, because every 2 seconds it's why. And I'm like, and my parents like, you know, that's you, right? And I'm like, ooh, so I'm crying. But I think, and also when the expectation is that you have a PhD or you're the faculty member or you're this expert, that you're supposed to know everything. And so a funny story is I have a PhD, and my parents, they're proud. They're so happy every time they send a letter. It's Dr. Tiffany Parkman on everything. And, I'll call my dad about something with my boiler, and he'll say, well, don't you have a PhD? Like, in human development, not in this, right? So the expectation that we should know everything. And I think we just have to step down from that. Like, I'm an expert in, human development, family systems, but my toddler is kicking my butt. And so oftentimes we have conversations with students or things are going on, and we don't stop to say, this doesn't make sense to me, or I don't understand this, or
Mm.
what, go back. And so, I'm known for, in class discussions, students will talk and I say, I'm sorry, I am so lost. And they will go back like, this means this, or, a whole discussion about, boo season, I will say things and they'll look like, what? And then we have to break it down and have a discussion about what that means. And so is it Maryland? Is it Baltimore? Is it, Indiana, Midwestern, or Southern, right? So I've done the gamut in the Southern states. And I think we just have to take a moment to make sure we really understand. And sometimes even when you think you understand something, you don't. And just, ask questions and make sure that you are on the right track with what is happening and what's going on. Students don't often like to challenge you. Well, let me see. Some of these new age students do. But sometimes there's a tension that if a student challenges you, particularly in public, that you have to, be right, or you have to know something. And I think there's just a humble nature that I don't know, and I can look it up, or you can teach me what you're talking about, and we can together find out. I think we just have to get into the mindset of self-reflection, of humbling ourselves, and being open to being taught by someone else.
So it's just an attitude that you live with all the time, and you're not like setting aside 15 minutes or an hour a week to reflect, but that you just bring it to the table no matter what you're doing. That's very interesting.
And I would say that was coupled with just moving around. So when you move to different places, I grew up in Indiana,
Right.
I went to college in Mississippi, and my family's from Mississippi, but I had only visited for summers, right? That's a whole different vibe. I went to Kentucky by myself. I didn't know anyone. So as a part of my life, I'm used to having to go someplace new, figure out what's happening, make new friends, and make sure that I am understanding what's happening so that I can navigate. And often we're just comfortable where we are. So get uncomfortable, go someplace you haven't been, talk to someone that you don't think that you would ever talk to, and learn something. That's how you can practice.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I just was going to say, talking about how can we better acknowledge the work of communities. I think it's a challenge because as faculty, we are prompted to do this kind of individualistic work that allows us to receive merit and promotion and tenure, not necessarily prepared to think about how communities can be an equal partner in the work that we're doing. In fact, we're not rewarded for that kind of work fairly. But I do think, for example, with this, the partnerships that we've established at the University of Delaware, where we're trying to kind of change that we have a partnership for healthy communities, a partnership for arts and culture and education, where we're outwardly facing the issues in the community and then bringing them back to faculty and students. The same way with the grants program, even though faculty may not initially think about how can we co-create this project, because it's a criteria, they have to think that way. So it is a challenge, but there are some strategies that we can put in place, even having awards programs for our community partners, making sure that they're integral to the work we do.
Thank you. Was there anything else? Any other questions or comments?
I would just like to say, and this was kind of a point in our group brought up, just the importance of the way we think about issues and language and how we talk about it. And I think that's something that was mentioned from other panelists. But just also in engaging with the community, just the academic language as opposed to the language that the community use, and how that can also sometimes be a barrier for how community members feel welcomed in these spaces. So.
Thank you. Okay. So I know a couple people have to get off early. Do we want to sort of wrap things up? Or I don't want to cut anybody off, though, if there's any other comments or thoughts anyone wants to share.
I just want to reiterate that you guys have a repository that collects information on how institutions and administrators can implement these things into practice. And I just hope people use it because it's a really great repository.
Could you just remind everybody what repository that is? That's
I'll put the link in the chat.
great, thank you.
And I have one more question too. I so often in these conversations, at least the conversations Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic has with community engaged practitioners at institutions in the communities, there's kind of this stereotype or this idea that faculty members are unchanging, or that that any sort of tenure requirement related to civic and community engagement simply won't work because faculty senates or faculty leadership won't accept it. And after this panel, I really think that that's probably not true. And so I would just like to hear from any one of you about what your perspective is on that. How can we, many of us don't have PhDs, many of us are not faculty members. And so we come at this from a different level in the field, but how do we work with that? How do we work around that if that is true?
Well, I can start. And one thing we do need to recognize is how universities are organized and decisions are made. And if there is a faculty senate who helps to make decisions, if you're a faculty member, volunteer to be on the faculty senate, to go where decisions are made. And then you can begin to, gather support. But it's an educational opportunity. This is the way I always think of it, that we need to help our committees who make these kinds of decisions to be educated so that they can make informed decisions about the importance of community work. We need to broaden what counts and who counts, is what we always say, in order for our individuals to do this work to get credit for it. And that takes, work, sometimes years of work at the faculty and the administrative level.
So, excuse me for not joining and being in all of the breakouts because I was in another session, but did you all talk about the work that we did convening the ISETS Institute, the Incorporating Community Engaged Teaching and Scholarship and Promotion and Tenure? Because that report, I think I just actually sent it to you because of the other meeting, Anthony, but we will be hosting another ISETS Institute in the future because some campuses are further along and it is individualized work on every campus, like how you have to go through the process with your committees and redefine things, but it is possible too, as Susan and Lynette know, to expand definitions that make it much more viable to invest in, and it takes more time to invest in community engaged scholarship and teaching. And so it needs to be recognized by the Academy, but the Academy is very prestige oriented and it does pay attention to what its neighbors are doing. So let's use that aspect of the culture of higher ed to raise up the examples of institutions that are leading this work that are Carnegie engaged. So we have on our website all the recorded sessions that we hosted with Middle States. Our partnership with Middle States is all about using the fact that it's in the missions of our higher ed institutions. So to be education for what, or fulfilling the public purposes of higher ed. So if we back that up, Middle States will require us, and I know that Yalda, you're with Sachs in Virginia, but Middle States would require us to demonstrate and show
how all the activities of the institution are dovetailing with that aspect of the mission. And so that opens the door to do a deep dive into redefining these parts of the tenure and promotion process. So, we could send to just those on this call that ISET's report just to show you the conversation that began, and then, figure out what next steps can be and how we can play a convening role in raising up this conversation to help the cross-pollination continue. Yeah. I'll get the report and Anthony will get it to you.
Sue, you're muted. You're muted.
Of course I am. So I just quickly wanted to say, I know a couple of people have to get off, so I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Jones, Dr. Coe, Dr. Overby, and Dr. Parkman for sharing your insights and recommendations. And thank you to the afternoon session participants for engaging so deeply with these issues. I wanted to remind everyone that the conference's closing convention conversation with Shirley Sagawa will occur this afternoon from 3 to 4, and hope you can join us. And then we'll just leave this open for a couple minutes so that if you want to grab the report, you can do so. But if you need to head off, that's okay too. So thank you for coming.